Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Kamal Singh from UN Global Compact Network India. Distinguished moderator and panelists, dear participants, colleagues, and partners, I take this opportunity to formally welcome you all to our webinar today on a very critical subject of COVID-19, from response to resilience, building community resilience using last-mile connectivity. Your overwhelming response truly bears testimony that how much this subject is so much important to each one of us as far as India is concerned. And you will see much more during the discussion that our distinguished panelist as well as moderator will bring to the table. So thank you very much for your overwhelming response this evening. My heartfelt thanks to Arkansas, a young thought leader and visionary working to contribute relentlessly to help fight this deadly virus, for having agreed to not only personally contribute as a panelist, but also partner the initiative as a co-host. Ladies and gentlemen, Sterlite Technologies Limited is our co-host of this webinar. We're indeed delighted to have an organization like Sterlite dedicated to sustainable development goals and sustainability as our partner. A special welcome to our distinguished moderator and panelists for this evening. Let me begin by first introducing the moderator for this evening webinar. Ms. Nupur Jhanjhanwala is the head of partnership at United Nations Women. But ladies and gentlemen, with her permission, I would like to share a few more words on her. And I have worked with her in my working with the UNGC India. And let me say that she had significantly brought a milestone in our working. Let me say that when we were working together with her in UN, we were curating a India Business Forum. And she could really make it to see that we run that India Business Forum in the last 2 years very successfully. Her help was so much immense, and she's very much close to the heart that the subject today we're also talking. Equally important, when she was part of the government of Nagaland, she also helped us to bring all partners, including industry, together in stitching a relationship with industry, with the government of Nagaland, and we created a very powerful summit. And she was really the Sutradhar, I would say, curator of that as well. Equally important, when we started working with the UN Women, she was the one person who advocated that if we work together, our power of impact will be much higher and much greater. And since then, we started working in our gender equality initiative, whether it was a summit, whether it was a best practices competition, whether it was an advocacy or even capacity building program. Today, with UN Women, we work with We Empower Asia project, which is now making huge impact going forward, and you will see much more happening on that area as well. So Nupur brings a very significant experience of not only working in government, not only working in industry, but also in the UN system, and you will see much more happening when she will curate this webinar before all of you. Now I come to my own I especially salute him. He has joined this webinar from France. He's not even India. And only a few days I reached him out and I said, can you please make it happen? And believe me, in a very short notice, he could say, yes, I will be able to help, but tell me what is that I can add value here, which we then explained to him and is very much there. Eric, I especially wants to acknowledge this, your overwhelming response, even for the webinar. Thank you very much for joining from France. Ladies and gentlemen, Eric is a friend, philosopher, and guide, but today he's the director, UNESCO representative for the New Delhi cluster that includes Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, Maldives, and Sri Lanka. And he's a very senior resident representative in the UN system. And whatever we today do, UNESCO and UN Global Compact India, there is a direct contribution and impact of Eric for making that relationship happen. So thank you, Eric, for really encouraging us as always. Now I come to Arkansas Sharma. Is again a friend, we may have changed our platform, but we continue to work towards sustainable development goals. She is currently Chief Sustainability Officer, Sterlite Technologies Limited, and the very fact that today we are curating this webinar, her support has been phenomenal. So welcome, Akansa, for making it happen. Now I come to our own dear friend, representing the whole sector, public sector, we call it in India, government sector, Mr. Atul Rastogi. He is the Executive Director of TCIL, and I will not add any adjective to his commitment, passion, and that thought leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, you will see during the webinar itself. So thank you, Atul Saab, for really coming on board at a very short notice, and I'm sure your thought leadership will be so much valued by all our participants attending this webinar. Sanyukta Samadar, our advisor from Niti Aayog, is still held up in Lok Sabha. There are some discussion that is happening, and she has told me that she will give me an invitation when she starts from this. Otherwise, we may have to leave her today because a lot of priorities are coming on our way as far as Lok Sabha is concerned. But work progresses. And I must say, before I say something about GCNI, that the presence of these distinguished speaker and the moderator really makes us to feel that their commitment to build resilient communities using technologies that deliver or can be made to deliver last mile connectivity. All of you are aware about UN Global Compact Network in India, but still a few words for those of us who are joining our webinar for the first time. And I must say, GCNI is the UN agency in India that works as custodian of all the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. We are a membership-driven network that works in the areas of advocacy, research, capacity building, and programming intervention projects around SDG and 10 global UN principles. So COVID-19, ladies and gentlemen, as you know, has disrupted our ways of living and working. SDG and 10 UNGC principles are the only ways to respond, restore, rebuild, and resume both our personal and professional lives. New normal has to be dealt with relevant technological enablers for taking everyone together, leave no one behind. Once again, I applaud Akansa for coming out with her path-breaking ideas on collaborating, using technology for maximum outreach and curating the entire agenda of this webinar. The discussion and interaction during the webinar today will be both engaging and enlightening. My best wishes to all of you. Before I invite Nupur, she is the orchestra of today's program. Let me say that she has started her career with ICT for development and has some extensive experience in working with the governments for digital inclusion initiative. Much more, ladies and gentlemen, you will see as she progresses with the webinar. Thank you, Nupur. My applaud to you today because you also always come on board to support this cause, and I really want to appreciate this. And thank you, and over to you. Over to Nupur, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Singh, for such a great introduction. I think we're here today for a very important topic, especially as we see how connectivity has played such a critical role in all of us surviving during the lockdown. India, as we know, has traditionally played a leadership role in building the infrastructure that enables the connectivity up unto the last mile. We have invested in both broadband, wireless, and mobile infrastructure with deep penetration of also devices. Speeds are probably not the same everywhere, but almost everyone has some form of access, whether it's through a telecenter, called a common service center in a Gram Panchayat, which I think we have close to 300,000 of them now in the country, or it is through a smartphone, a cheap smartphone that somebody holds, or a laptop or a desktop at home in an office. We have seen over the last few weeks during the lockdown how everything we have managed to survive by being online, whether it is classrooms being taken online for education, ranging from class academic work to physical education classes to music lessons to dance lessons. I've seen dramas being played played out online, to healthcare benefits, testing and symptomatic telemedicine, telehealth services, to communication, e-commerce, um, delivery of ration cards, quick evolving business models where companies like Zomato, for example, has started delivering groceries when they couldn't deliver food. Um, and then most importantly, banking, where things have happened online, and our postal community, which I believe was connected thanks to the initiatives under Mr. Rastogi. The postman has played a critical role in enabling cash withdrawals from door to door in rural India. So I think I would hope that our discussions today will range on how, as a community and a society, we're moving towards this, how this can be used and leveraged both from a technology and a use case scenario to achieve the SDGs. What are the gaps that we are seeing? But before we go into the discussion, can I call upon each of you all to give a quick 5-minute introductory comments? And so can we start with Akanksha, please?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Singh, and thank you, Nupur. So while this is a very important discussion forum, and I'm really pleased to be a part of this, thank you for having me here. I'll quickly talk about the work that we do at STL, and we are the #1 and leading data networks innovator across the world, driving connectivity solutions through networks and software, including services part. We are also facilitating a more inclusive world through partnership with the telcos, cloud companies, cities and networks, and also large enterprises. While doing all of that, we are also contributing towards building a digital landscape in India through software-defined networking solutions. We are also leading and transforming digital inclusion programs, connecting over 7 million people across 4,000 villages in the state of Maharashtra, and also providing high-speed broadband in over 4 million homes in the state of Telangana. Backed with all of this, we are also providing innovations and solutions where it matters in the states of Uttar Pradesh, Maharashtra, and Telangana in India. While doing all of that through our community initiatives, we aim to transform everyday living. We are reaching out to over 1 million lives through very dedicated initiatives on environment, health, women empowerment, and education. As we all know, the world is facing a major challenge because of COVID. I'll very briefly touch upon a few of the initiatives that STL has been doing, especially on the community part, building resilience against the pandemic, which includes raising awareness amongst masses through digital technology, working with the stranded laborers at some of the remotest part of the country, including Gadchiroli, Andaman Nicobar, Lakshadweep, where we are still working with the government on the data fiber lines, working on women issues while this turbulent times, and helping them, encouraging them develop mask PPEs and other safety equipments to fight the contagion better. Also assuring the safety of health workers. In addition to strengthening the public health systems, we have contributed massively in the form of contributions of ventilators and health equipments to the government hospitals in many parts of the country. So while we are all trying to adjust to the new normal and adapt, I believe it establishes the need for encouraging digital technology and network solutions much more than ever. I'm looking forward to have a very collaborative discussion with all of you on this.
Thank you, Akanksha. That was interesting to learn about all the things Sterilite is doing. May I call in Eric next to give some introductory remarks?
Sure, and thank you for having me for this webinar. When it comes to last mile connectivity, and of course, as it relates to the UNESCO mandate, we have been over the last couple of months discussing a lot how to educate children and youth using mobile technology, ICT tools, and a number of other new age technology. I think it's really important to make sure that the work that we all have to do with regards to education does not stop. So connectivity, ICTs play a major role. But for the purposes of this particular webinar, I really want to concentrate a little more on what we have done with regards to sharing information. Of course, the mass media have played an amazing role and have done their best in making sure that information reaches everybody. But the last mile, as you call it, is the hardest one to reach. And we strongly believe at UNESCO in the power of community radio. Community radios are able to reach out to communities which otherwise have very little access to information, which sometimes often don't have access to television, sometimes don't have access to radio, and at least the radios as we know it. So community radio based in isolated areas have made a really big difference, and we've tried to support them. And in this case, it's important also to underline that the concept of community radio more and more has also ICT and mobile technologies use at its core. Today, for instance, most mobile phones come with inbuilt FM receivers, which is a great development for community radios, because the majority of community radio stations broadcast in the FM frequency modulation spectrum, and their listeners are also often on the move. So this has made access to community radio broadcasts much more easy for people who in the past didn't have a lot of such access. We see nowadays that on-air and off-air studio equipment in community radios are equipped with software that allow the gathering, processing, and production of radio content from digital sources in a variety of very easy ways. This is developments that we didn't know just 5 years ago, certainly 10 years ago, and even 5 years ago. So we really think that community radios can give a voice to local communities and also report on local community news. So we've been actively promoting community radios, actively promoting also the use of mobile phones for this purpose, including for reporting purposes. So we have a number of schemes on the way, working in a number of states throughout India, where we try to, together with our partners, to train journalists how to conduct live coverage of events, interviews, reporting using mobile telephone calls, WhatsApp calls also. We all know the problems of WhatsApp, but it is sometimes also a very useful way to report. So this is really how we think we can go all the way to the last mile. And today I want to focus mostly on this particular aspect. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. I think that's an interesting angle. I think community radios also help in disseminating accurate information, especially in times when fake news has become a norm. So as we go into the discussion, I think these are things we can talk about in greater detail. Mr. Rastogi, may I call upon you now for your introductory comments, please?
Yeah, thank you for giving me this opportunity to discuss a very important topic. And as already mentioned by Eric, the community radio has been proven a very good source of information for the people. But here, as a executive director in PCI, we have been involved in many mega projects, infrastructure projects of telecom and IT. So the entire backbone is really an amazing thing, and entire telecom and IT is now inclusive. It means that all group of people and all type of people should have access to it. And definitely telecom and IT technologies are pervasive also, so that it goes into each and every segment of the society. And the overall economic development of any society depends upon these technological changes now. So during the discussion, I would be touching upon what type of arrangements are there at the back end, which is not visible to normal people. And at the end, what we get is a device like mobile phone or a computer, which is the end user who can use it and use all the applications over. So we have networks from satellite. For example, PCL has been helpful in deploying projects in Northeast region for connecting 5,000 unconnected villages through satellite. Actually, satellite technology has, taken a leap ahead. And there is a special technology called beaming technology, where we can deliver high bandwidth to a specific region. Earlier, the footprint was covered with a shared band. So now it is possible to cover any island. For example, Lakshadweep, we have a cluster of multiple islands. So we can cover each island with high bandwidth data. We have connectivity undersea submarine cables also running across the oceans where the internet is working. And all our islands also connected in India to the main earth stations. On the other hand, we have public networks which are delivering the voice and data network services, 2G, 3G, 4G, and now we are coming up with 5G. 5G has an added advantage of low latency and multiple devices can be connected. So we will be seeing in future a lot of revolution in terms of connected devices. So not only mobile phones will be connected to the network, but there are many other like man, material, and machine. All things will be connected to the internet. So it will create an environment for helping people to achieve or to accomplish their task in a much easier way, and at the same time taking care of the climate and environment in a better way. Because if a problem is created by technology, it can only be solved by technology. So, for example, climate change, we are seeing 1.5 degree centigrade Celsius temperature target. These things are possible by adopting new technologies in various companies, and ICT has played a big role in it. We have implemented rural connectivity project where 130,000 post offices across country are connected through internet over 3G, 4G network, and they are delivering data connectivity. That is how postman is able to collect cash from the rural houses also. So I am directly heading that project for that. Last 2 years we are implementing it. We have a lot of challenges in implementing. There are places where there is no electricity. We have to provide solar solutions for powering up the devices. But now we can say that more than 80% of the connectivity is done. So this is the brief. We can talk a lot about technology. So you can continue with your discussion, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Rastogi. That was very helpful. So one of the things that seems to be emerging from what all the panelists have said is there is no one fit solution for everyone in this country. I think it has to be a combination of multiple technologies, connectivity solution, multiple devices, and multiple models. So if I could, Akanksha, how do you envisage different types of technology, whether it's fiber, satellite, radio, and now we're seeing a push through through television as well, where we have multiple education channels across television as well and other services that are being provided. So, what do you see evolving in the near future?
Well, I think technology-led digital access has, in a way, transformed the entire world and our access to information in a big way. Because when we are talking about access, which is a very important enabler of or many of the sustainable development goals, be it related to health, education, gender, or anything else. I see that evolving in a very big way. For example, we have very recently started a program of connecting the Gram Panchayats through STL Gram, offering integrated set of services on women's skilling, access to better marketplaces through Amazon, Saheli, and other platforms of Shopify, where at the village level, people are not just having much more access to information through digital connectivity solutions, but are also able to sell their products. They are able to have a complete access to healthcare services through online and basic consultation that they could gather. So I really see that, this technology and many more platforms and are fostered by technology are transforming the way we think, we live, and also, the entire development space.
That's very interesting, Akanksha, that you mentioned this, is because up until maybe 10 years ago, if somebody had spoken about rural India, somebody is going on Shopify, one would be talking about, like Mr. Rastogi mentioned, where is the electricity? Where is the battery life? Who has the devices? Where is the Indian, where are the languages? How do you expect कि वो photo ऊपर डालेगी? What if उसका product return हो गया? We would have had those kind of conversations, and now it's become normalized that it's possible. And I think that's also because of the penetration of devices that enables this and the awareness around it. Eric, if I could pull you into this conversation in the work that you're seeing in India, beyond radios, you mentioned smart devices. What is your experience or viewpoint in terms of what kind of devices are being used for this connectivity? Are we still looking at shared access models, individual access, a combination, in terms of how we go ahead and how they can be used for better SDG implementation?
Thank you for your question. And also going back to the point you were making earlier, is what is going to change after COVID-19? Well, what we have clearly seen through this crisis is that even though technology makes a huge difference, it is still not accessible to all. And I think that there has to be a push, and India has made gigantic strides forward, but there's still a final push if you want to ensure this last mile connectivity. We know that where all of us live in cities and can talk to each other, have connectivity. That is still not the case everywhere. So there needs to be a final push to make it available to all. I would say inclusively accessible to all. And this means a number of things. First of all, it means that technology must be affordable. It is still not affordable to everyone, even though, again, India has made incredible progress. It must be available in all areas, including in remote rural areas. It must also be easy to use. I think sometimes we all get confused by technology. For instance, this very webinar is taking place on one specific technology. I just jumped from another webinar which was conducted on another technology. Not all of them are made equal. Not all of them are made easy to use. So imagine for people in remote areas sometimes how confusing it would be to jump on a call like this one. We must also, as I think has already been pointed out, support multilingual interfaces. This must include voice, text, sign language. So in other words, all of this technology, which is making a huge difference, still needs to overcome social barriers and promote community interaction, participation, and engagement. That is clearly one of the lessons of the last couple of months, and what we'll really need to continue to evolve. And I really want to repeat how amazing the last several years have been in terms of progress, but we're almost there.
I agree, Eric. It was interesting that about 2 weeks into the lockdown, the chairperson of the National Commission for Women came out and said that we had witnessed a twofold increase in the reporting for domestic violence. And I say it was interesting is because with that came the change in behavior patterns of how women were actually reporting the crime. A lot more reporting was happening online versus somebody going to the police station. Now, I do know that there are cases where in certain regions where there is underreporting because women have been locked into their houses and not been able to. But having said that, just the fact that the National Commission of Women launched a WhatsApp number to reach out to more women is an indicator that there are opportunities to be more inclusive in different ways. beyond just education and information push, even if it comes to your own security. I think when it comes to languages, what we have seen is our ability to manage video-based broad services. I think this lockdown has shown how easily people adapt to that video calling, whether it's a WhatsApp call, whether it's Skype, whether it's a professional setup like the one we are in right now. The range is unlimited. Mr. Rastogi, from a bandwidth perspective and a backbone perspective, what is your take on how India managed this? Why did we not have, like we have electricity outages, have data outage, when we saw such large consumption, when data has always been a problem with India?
Yeah, that's a very good question, actually. We have developed a very massive optical fiber network, which is the base of all the bandwidth carrying capacity of India. And then we have international linkages through optical fiber cables, submarine cables, through Singapore, through US, and major traffic diverters. This is the backbone which is utilized by the satellite network. So one point of place, the satellite station will uplift the bandwidth so that it can be distributed to the other satellite VSAT stations. So we have a project, National Internet Backbone Project, which was undertaken by BSNL and executed by TCI, where all the subscribers in BSNL are getting the internet connectivity. Even the private operators are taking connectivity through that. So optical fiber is the key to success for maintaining for a very long period. There is no other technology other than that which can give gigabits of bandwidth, and we can always enhance the bandwidth as per our need. That is a key feature of the technology. We have optical fiber strands which are very cheap, and as compared to copper cable or any other media, physical media, that has been proven for a very long period of time. So internet bandwidth is calculated based on the region, and number of fiber are provided accordingly. And it is a continuous process to enhance. This is a backend process which is not known to the user normally. So every day we keep on extracting reports to how much bandwidth is choking somewhere, and then we try to divert it and try to add capacity to the network. This is how everything is going.
That's interesting. Akanksha, do you have anything from your perspective that you're seeing? You mentioned earlier that you're doing a Gram Panchayat connectivity program. What has been your experience in the connectivity?
Well, like Eric just mentioned that there's a lot more to do. I think India is still facing a lot of challenge in connectivity issues, particularly in the rural and the remote places. And as per some of the statistics, I believe only 8% of the rural households across the country are connected through data. So I think there's a greater opportunity and scope. Having said that, I also feel that with the inclusion of technology in our everyday lives, and especially as we are seeing in the lockdown times, where almost everybody is carrying the show on using technology in whichever way possible. The businesses are running, the government is running, and so are the other the social sector. It's very interesting to observe that how are we facilitating, how's the social sector responding to this entire technology interface. And here, when I say, I'm also talking about the last mile connectivity solutions, which are facilitated through the mobile apps, through the use of ICT technology. And we talked about the vernacular versions of using technology solutions. So I think that's really increasing with with the rapid technology interface. Having said that, I think we all need to form a much more collaborative approach. The businesses need to really come at the forefront along with the government to lead technology in a much bigger way, providing access to all.
Yeah, so go ahead, Mr. Stuki.
Yeah, Government of India has undertaken a project of Bharat Broadband Network Limited, and in phase one they have connected 1 lakh villages through the optical fiber, and total 2,50,000 villages are to be connected, and they're all the work is going on, and almost second phase is also going to complete soon. So that will create a massive network infrastructure for it will pave the way for access of rural population for the data services. Apart from this, mobile service providers have already reached into the rural segment, and they are already provided their 4G networks into the rural segments, independent of this particular network and without waiting for this optical fiber network to complete. So we have multiple directions where we are approaching the rural population for providing them the data issues. The only thing is affordability, as Eric mentioned very nicely, that the rural population cannot afford the smartphones, and there is no training for using in a different English language. So although now multiple languages, multi-language phones have come up, and people have started using it. And one more thing, for example, most of the rural population is having agriculture as a prime profession. So, for example, TCL is running a M-Kisan portal for agriculture ministry, and they are not running exactly, but we are providing SMS facility. So whatever schemes are launched by government from the center, they reaches all the population, more than 40 crores farmers through their mobile over the air, and all the functions of those schemes are educated to them on daily basis. So there is a bulk messaging which is going on between government to citizen, especially focusing on the rural population to help them, for example, to help them for getting the various supplies, for loans, for any kind of problems in their crop. There is a e-Kisan call center also they can call. So all these technologies utilized for helping them to increase their productivity, and it is actually happening. But there is always a scope for more improvement.
So that's very interesting. So I'm going to flip what you have just said and throw it to Eric. While it is true that these kind of digital services, whether it is information push or DBT, is true and is creating more inclusion in the country, it is also slowly but surely creating pockets of exclusion, which is based on, it could be based on caste, it could be based on gender. I know at UN Women we've been studying how women have less access to devices, especially if it's a shared device, whether it is the wife and the husband sharing it, even when it comes to children, if there is an education program and the son and the daughter both have to use it, it is generally the son that's given the phone versus the daughter. And we're seeing this evolve. Eric, how are you seeing this or how can we work both from a private sector and government in collaboration, and us as UN bodies work together to minimize this exclusion, which may be societal, may just be afterthought and not realizing?
No, I appreciate the question. At the same time, I tend to see things maybe a little bit more positively than you in a way. Of course, there are pockets of exclusion, but the situation that we see today is definitely much better than, imagine if this had happened 10 or 20 years ago, the exclusion would be 10 times more than what
right.
it is now. So I think that we have to look at that, be objective, recognize the progress, and recognize also what remains to be done. So these pockets of inclusion are shrinking, and we must work together to make sure that there are no more. And as I said earlier, it is clearly within the grasp of society as a whole. The leadership comes from the government, and it's very clearly there, and it's a very determined leadership. Civil society has a contribution to make, and business has a contribution to make. We all have a contribution to make, and international organizations are there to advise and do their small bit whenever they can, whether it is UN Women, UNESCO, or other colleagues. These pockets of inclusion, I'm really glad that you have mentioned, still concern a lot women. I think girls and women, and I would like to make a point about that, remain largely one of the most important, regretfully, elements of these pockets of inclusion. And that is definitely something that we must address. We must address it through public information campaign. We must address it in a variety of ways, including through technological means. In this regard, perhaps some of the people who are watching would be interested in the short film that Nandita Das, the
Yes.
director and actress, has released, thanks to the support of UNESCO, UN Women, UNICEF, and the UN FPA. I think that this is a very strong film entitled Listen to Her. For those of you who may not have seen it yet, please go to YouTube, Instagram, and other platforms to see it. It's only 7 minutes long, but I think it shows in a very powerful way the fact that during COVID-19, there's still situations where women live in a more delicate way than others. The film depicts the life of someone who lives in the city, but also the life of a woman who is the victim of domestic violence. And quite clearly, that's where also technology can come into being. And it does, the film does end with numbers to report incidents of domestic violence, which unfortunately have risen during COVID-19. But again, I want to go back to my main point, which is that these pockets of exclusion have diminished greatly. And I'm sure that within a few short years, they can disappear completely. We just need to be aware that they're still there. We saw that in the field of education, but perhaps I can wait for later in our conversation to talk about what has happened in the field of education and precisely on last mile connectivity.
I think that's very interesting, Eric, and I agree 100% because we've had successful programs like Google had the Internet Sati program that they did. Amazon has their Sahelis. We're seeing we have the Government of India's Common Service Center program where there are over 300,000 telecenters, of which I think more than 30% are run by women now. So we are definitely reaching to the marginalized. I think we need to be mindful that we continue being inclusive, both from ability, gender, and economic basis and literate. So having said that, before we go into the services a little bit more, I want to flip this conversation a bit in terms of achieving the SDGs from the perspective of how this broadband-based community and society now and economy is enabling new forms of job creation, new opportunities for livelihood, new opportunities for equalization. And I'd like to throw this open to all of you all. For example, I know Akanksha, your company Sterilite, has a manufacturing unit that's run 100% by women. This probably 10 years ago would not be something that I would hear. You know,
Yeah.
So these are things that are flipping in terms of the way people can participate today. Somebody who may be from a rural area can become a leading healthcare frontline worker for a pandemic. So I leave that open to you all now.
So if I may take the opportunity, Nupur, to add a little bit on your previous question and also on the inclusion of marginalized using technology. So we have been working extensively with the marginalized community and also with women in rural parts of the country. And very recently, we did a research where we found that when these women having access to skilling and income generation activities, the first thing most of these women are buying as their income, is mobile phone. So I think it really speaks about and establishes the case that how much access to technology is the want of these marginalized communities, so-called, and how they themselves are coming forward to bridge this gap. I think this is the most interesting point, which really thrilled me, for that, instead of any institutional mechanism to facilitate this entire process, these women in Maharashtra, they were coming forward and they were buying, small mobile phones as their first income, so I think and that really says that how we are progressing as a country towards better access to technology and solutions.
That's interesting. Eric, would you like to jump in there?
Well, perhaps that's the opportunity to focus on, for me, on Sustainable Development Goal 4, which focuses on education, because that's quite clearly the one that UNESCO is most committed to. We are committed to the cause of equitable and inclusive education for all as part of this particular goal. A number of UN agencies work on this goal, but UNESCO is meant to be the leader in this field, and we've really tried to make a difference in that regard, because we have seen that technologies can make a very, very big difference. It would be useful, of course, to remind everybody that during this crisis, we saw that just about 2 billion students around the world stopped having access to an education. So what were the solutions? And the first solution that we wanted to underline that could make a difference is indeed online educational tools. So we did create, together with partners, including, for instance, our friends at UNICEF, a global education coalition, which seeks to facilitate inclusive learning opportunities for children and youth during this period of sudden and completely unprecedented educational disruption. In this regard, our response included the creation of a repository of learning platforms designed to, I would say, support the continuity of the curriculum-based study. There's a number of these learning platforms and tools that are accessible on a number of online sites, including, of course, on the UNESCO website. And it really aims to provide digital tools and learning environment solutions which are adequate to national contexts. In India, we worked also very closely with the government, NGO partners, and our friends at the UNHCR to procure and distribute small materials, even pencils and notebooks, but also radio devices to enable children from the most marginalized groups and with online solutions to follow educational programs from a distance. So that's what was done. At the same time, very quickly after the crisis started, let's say after a couple of weeks, we realized that there was also a huge gap. That there's a huge gap because out of the nearly 2 billion, I mean, I'm just rounding up the figure, but around the world, there were many of the children and the youth who did not have access to online solutions. That is really a big problem, and we need to be able to bridge that gap when it comes to the fulfillment of Sustainable Development Goal 4, again focusing on education. So all that to say that mobile connectivity has a great potential to bring changes on the ground when it comes to education, but we need to offer stable internet connections and mobile devices in all areas, so that students and the teachers also, let's not forget the teachers, can provide courses. The students need to have access, and the teachers need to be able to also relay their programs online. So in this context, internet connection in all regions throughout India, all the way to the last mile, would ensure really that all students have access to digital learning platforms, which would obviously contribute towards the realization of SDG 4. And in the absence of internet connection, sometimes we need to look at additional solutions. For instance, the creation of offline platforms. This has happened already. Offline platforms which have been developed to make sure that we create equal opportunities for all. Again, we must make sure that this extraordinary disruption created by COVID-19 does not affect the realization of all SDGs, and in our view, it starts with SDG 4.
Thank you, Eric. I think that's a very important point that you've brought in. I think another important aspect is ensure banking and availability of financial services. Mr. Rastogi, I know you've been working with the Postal Department, and when it comes to banking, security becomes very, very critical, both from a network point of view, as well as from a bandwidth availability continuity point of view. How do you envisage that in terms of what has been your experience over the last few weeks as we've been in lockdown?
Lockdown was actually a test for all these industries like banking, telecom, because you have to work during the condition where the lockdown is there for everyone. Because the COVID virus is same for everyone, even for a banking person or a telecom person. So that was a challenge. But because of the ICT technology, these two industries are dependent on ICT a lot. So we could manage, or it is still, there is no disruption in any kind of banking or any services. All the ATMs were working. ATMs are connectivities provided through 3G, 4G networks, optical fibers. So what I would like to say, banking in rural segment is already needs a lot of support. Post offices have come up with these ICT devices which are connected to the central banking system. So somebody can deposit its cash and it will reflect in the bank accounts. Already government has opened so many bank accounts, so people are able to use this. But it requires a lot of improvement in terms of connectivity, last mile connectivity also, because the data rates are not very good in rural area at the moment. So during COVID, the credit card system, the Paytm, the banking gateways, they have been working. People are avoiding exchanging cash, and they are using more and more platforms. Government is also promoting these platforms only. So somebody was informing that the number of transactions in the credit card segment is largest during this COVID period. And we have to understand that slowly we will have to move to the cashless society. And these things, like already we get OTPs for our secure transactions. So security is already inbuilt into our logical system. So even if COVID has come, so it has been the same security systems which were working. So there is no much impact, whereas it has only helped people to manage their lives better.
So, Akanksha, thank you for that, Atulji. Akanksha, what do you see the role of businesses in us coming closer to achieving the SDGs using technology? As the ecosystem, how can you contribute or enable this process?
As I said, that businesses definitely need to come to the forefront because I would say that development calls for a very strong collaborative approach between the private sector, the multilateral, and the government, all coming together and building bridges for the access to better solutions on each of the sustainable development goals. And I see a huge opportunity with the private sector, since they are the resource generators, to provide solutions to some of the last mile connectivity issues, that particularly in relation to India, the communities have. So definitely a collaborative approach and being together is the solution, and businesses are proactively coming to that alignment, especially after the CSR mandate in the country. However, that's not limited to it, because many of the philanthropic contributions are coming all the way from different parts of the world to provide solutions on SDG. So yes, I think I would say collaboration is the key here.
I think we have a lot of questions from the audience, so maybe we can start taking them one at a time. The first question, I believe, is what are the panel's views on village tourism? How can this be implemented by the government and people and organizations working along with the UN system? So I open up to any of you all. It's about village tourism.
I'm sorry, village?
Tourism. How can we encourage?
This relates to one aspect of UNESCO's mandate in the field of culture. And we've been working very hard over the last several years to make sure that the wonderful Indian traditions and customs that exist in villages don't disappear. This is what we call in UNESCO parlance the intangible cultural heritage of India. Everybody's very familiar with the World Heritage sites, which are already very much on the map for tourism. But in addition, there are literally thousands of practices throughout India, traditions which have existed for hundreds of years, which need to be preserved, better known, and in a sustainable way where we need to give access for visits. We've worked very successfully, in particular in West Bengal, to identify these practices and make them better known to would-be tourists, actually taking tourists to these villages. We're just starting a program in Rajasthan, which is going on despite the COVID-19 crisis, where we go out and identify in the villages, again, those practices that are in need of better recognition. It can relate to oral traditions, it can relate to arts and crafts, it can relate to music festivals and so on, and make sure that once they are better known and cataloged, if you want, we can quote unquote market them to the public. Perhaps it's a different debate, but we are keenly aware that these traditions need to be preserved and promoted, and we hope that as soon as the COVID-19 nightmare lifts, we can reinvigorate our efforts with new energy.
Thanks, Eric. That was helpful. The next question is, which other opportunities do you see opening up in rural India due to better technology-based connectivity?
So I think access to technology opens up opportunities to, in many ways and, many dimensions. I think access to forums like Shopify and the global marketplaces where women can directly access and sell their handcraft products was just one of the examples that I gave. But, in terms of skilling, education, strengthening the public healthcare system using telemedicine, online doctor consultation, to providing education modules is something that I immediately see, and that's already happening. Some of the projects are in a very big way led by STL itself in the rural and urban areas both across the country. So I think access to technology in rural areas would just open up door to many opportunities.
Would any of the other panelists like to also respond?
Yeah, I would like to add the availability of e-marketplaces is key for any business to succeed. There, for example, the e-marketplace like Amazon, we should have our own Indian Amazon system for selling rural products in global markets. And I think this kind of focus is now coming up in lockdown 4, like local and local things are coming up from the government, and they are promoting local products which are exportable and all that. Their quality should be as per international standard. So the e-marketplace is again the technology-based platforms, which will definitely help population to do their business.
Yeah, in the continuation of what I was saying earlier, I've seen for myself how technology can give incredible access to people, to markets for people who had no access before. I just mentioned what we do in the field of intangible cultural heritage, and it made me think of the question made me think of a young man in West Bengal who practices dokra. I don't know if you're all familiar with dokra, which is an art form mostly in West Bengal, Orissa, and actually other parts of the country. but he was doing wonderful work, but had no access until we went in there with an NGO partner and trained him and others in the village who were, practicing Dokra. And today, this young man was trained to be able to put online his products, and with only his mobile phone, not even a website, he is able to sell to resellers or directly to individuals throughout India and abroad what he produces, cutting a lot of intermediaries in the process. And it was amazing. I've seen him a couple of times already. It happens to be a young man, but I know that young women also have been able to do the same. And this is the difference that technology can make. This young man remains anchored in his rural community, practicing what he likes to do, what he learned from his parents, and he's making actually more and more money out of it. So that's what technology can do. And so that's why it is very important to provide this connectivity to the last mile, train young people in particular, everybody, but young people in particular, because they are naturally more adept at learning and using these tools, and it can make a wonderful difference.
Yeah, and add to that, Eric, I think it also helps build rural economies. I think we solve the problem of migration into urban areas, where people tend to live in more poverty than they do in their rural areas, and bring opportunity to the doorstep. When you have the combination of connectivity, device, and service. Our next question is, how do we see supply chains being positively impacted through the last mile? And I would like to add to that is, how do we see a shift in supply chains as well from the impact of COVID going forward?
So, as businesses, I think access to technology, especially on the last mile, has really proved that technology can enable better systems and solutions while working with the supply chains both up and down the stream. And when I say that, I also talk about some of the sustainable development solutions while working with waste, developing more partnerships with the local suppliers, at the same time having some eco-friendly solutions. For example, we have recently turned out to be a completely zero waste to landfill certified company across the world. So I think there are a lot of opportunities both up and down that stream while working with supply chains, finding local solutions using technology in a much, much better way.
We have global positioning systems like GPS systems deployed for tracking supply chain while they are shipping. So a lot of movement of the goods. The advent of IoT, Internet of Technology, and artificial intelligence technologies is leveraging to use RFID technologies, for example, to track or the devices or the packages from the warehouse to the customer end. So these things are enabled by technology, and supply chain has taken a lot of advantage out of it. So this has created a lot of employment opportunities for the people. I would like to say that this is trying to increase the contribution in the economy.
I think so. I think also the fact that in agriculture, we are seeing new innovative models come out from direct farm to consumer has been enabled primarily because of technology. This wouldn't have been possible without it, where you can procure directly from the farmer, give them a higher rate, and buy. I think those kind of solutions also help in more traditional supply chains, but enhance the process of delivery and customer acquisition. Also increasing incomes and margins across the stakeholders in the supply chain. And I believe we're going to see more of that as we proceed over the next few years. I think COVID is going to push us to that. Our next question is, I think it's a continuation of what I was just mentioning, is how do we see technology and last mile connectivity benefiting the agriculture sector?
Well, I'll just talk about my experiences from a food company where I was leading sustainability and responsible business practices. And the supply chain has been greatly benefited, like you mentioned, in the agriculture and the food sector, where the middleman concept has greatly been marginalized, who used to marginalize the producers and the linkage between the markets. And I think nowadays it's not just direct access to the market, which has been greatly promoted leveraging technology, but also better technology and crop related information to the farmers, right, particularly in the agriculture domain, about the crop diseases, which earlier used to be not very much aware, resulting into a massive damage in their production and their entire half yearly effort and toil used to really go down the drain. So I think better access to information using technology, be it related to crop diseases, weather forecasts, better access to markets, has resulted in a big way promoting this entire ecosystem to gain an local economic wealth.
YouTube has been proven as a best source of learning as well as guiding people in their own language, and it has been helpful for the skill development also. Rural people can understand, they want to understand what type of technology is used for in a better way, how the tools are used, what are the best available tools, and what is the best prices for them. So every information, and it's a searchable engine basically. The search engines have changed the life of everyone. So as for the agriculture people also. And multi-language along with videos, so it has changed entire scenario.
Thank you. The next question is for Eric. The user asks, the attendee says, Mr. Eric, you spoke about community radio stations. How do we see them being implemented in rural and suburban areas? Expanding of their network.
Well, I think that there's already a process of expansion underway, and I think the government has actually seen it. I know that the minister was involved himself in mobilizing community radios, I think only a few days ago. So I think there has been a realization through COVID-19 that community radio stations can be useful. And they need to be better supported. Some of them work really on a shoestring with very, very little in terms of support. There is so much that UNESCO can do. There's a lot that the government can do, and I think they are doing that. And I think that community radios can be a very useful tool. I think at the beginning of the program, you alluded to misinformation, and we have seen, unfortunately, an exponential increase of misinformation and disinformation around the world, and that included India. We have worked very closely with community radios to encourage them to check their information and information sources before they go on air. And there's a lot of very useful fact-checking websites, which a number of which are based in India. So community radios have actually already, in a way, benefited is not the right word, but I think we've seen more the usefulness of community radios since the beginning of COVID-19. And I hope, since this webinar is also meant to be addressed to the private sector, that some private sector companies could, if not adopt a community radio, at least support a number of specific community radios. So I would address this to businesses and ask them that if they have some specific target communities for their business, they should seriously look at identifying which specific community radios are located there and providing them support. That means financial support, and usually the amount needed is very, very modest, and also some training opportunities if they can. This can be a very, very useful contribution. I know that businesses today in India often look for opportunities in terms of CSR, and I would say that in the context of this crisis, we have seen that they should look at specifically at community radios.
Thanks, Eric. And I'd like to add to that is we are also seeing an increase in grassroots reporting, individual grassroots reporting. For example, we have a group in Bundelkhand where women lead called Khabar Lehriya, where we have young journalists using YouTube who report from the ground and using simple technology. And I think that's another powerful way of reporting and information dissemination that is emerging that can supplement what community radios do as well. Moving on to our next question is, how do we see technology catering the older population and cater to them in terms of health interventions, engagement, and participation with the rest of the community?
So one of the, I think, again, technology is an enabler to better our lives in today's times. And when I say that, I also mean that access to better healthcare services. We have just been seeing that in one initiative for public healthcare that we are doing for the tribals in Silvassa, where public transportation is a major concern considering the topography of that area. And the villages are pretty scattered. Even the houses are pretty scattered in the hilly regions of that area. Having said that, when this remote telemedicine van moves from one location to another on a weekly roster basis, providing access to healthcare services, distribution of generic medicines that we are doing, I think it in totality really provides better access. And this is just one example of many others who are doing tremendous work on last mile connectivity to public healthcare, leveraging technology. Telemedicine is emerging as a one big branch of innovations where millions of lives are being benefited through distance consultation, distance surgeries, and many other community level interventions.
One quick point, since it's beyond my brief, but we're talking about the elderly, and I think quite obviously this crisis has given a huge chance to telemedicine for the elderly. I think that this is something that around the world, not just in India, people, before the crisis wanted to talk to their doctor or have access, and number one, it was not possible for a number of reasons, sometimes because they became less accessible, particularly in rural areas. And we saw a natural reluctance of the doctors also to engage with patients the way they used to be. So telemedicine has been on the rise. It's clearly, and I haven't seen a lot written about that yet. And again, this is not part of UNESCO's mandate, but to answer the question of the caller, of the viewer rather, I think it would be the one obvious thing that will change post-COVID, and it will help bridge the gap to the last mile, increasing telemedicine opportunities.
Excellent. So we have time for two more questions, and so the next one is, there are some pitfalls of the use of technology as well. What are precautions that should be kept in mind when using technology, especially for connectivity with the last mile? Just okay, would you like to come in here?
Actually, technology is a man-made thing. So even for the natural things like human body is made by nature, even we get sick. So as technology. So we need to resolve those problems. The resilience basically is the right word for that. The problems can come, but we have to recover as fast as possible. So for that, again, we have to use technology, the data dissemination and fast deployment of teams for fixing up the faults. So this is a continuous challenge which is improving every day. So I really don't understand why such a question has come up, like what technology cannot provide.
So I think it's from the perspective of, say, cyber crimes, right? You have a lot of online banking fraud. You often get a cousin who sent an email about $10 billion that are being transferred into my bank account, a cousin I never knew I had. You have issues of cyber violence, especially women face the brunt of it. Things like, for example, we are seeing rapes being telecast live on Facebook. And thanks to the technology, we are able to catch the woman catch the criminal immediately. arrest and put in the criminal system. But unfortunately, that video continues till eternity being shared about it, and the woman relives it, and we have no way to sort of take it back at this point. You know, we've seen issues in which you have child pornography. When you do online classes, we've seen classes being crashed. So from those perspectives, I think there are pros and cons of everything, and there are cautious, and the systems are being built in. Maybe there are opportunities for us to start talking about behavioral change and being cautious. Like when you live in a house, you lock your door. We maybe need to start thinking of how we lock the technology and be safe. We don't give our OTP. For example, the government has done a great job with the awareness that don't give an OTP over the phone or share it with a stranger. So things like that, I think we need to keep in mind. So maybe that's something the user was trying to say. Akanksha and Eric, would you like to add to this?
Yes, of course. I mean, you've rightly alluded to a number of dangers that we have seen during the last couple of months. But if we have to look at the sort of the overwhelming, the largest threat is misinformation, disinformation. Just like we have seen a pandemic of COVID-19, we have seen a literally a pandemic of misinformation around the world. Misinformation has been used by many and all for a variety of reasons, and it has become a plague. This is something that we need to eradicate, just as we need to eradicate COVID-19 as soon as possible. And we do see the emergence of a number of measures to counter misinformation, and I think they're all very important, and I hope they're going to amplify. I was very interested, for instance, again within the UNESCO mandate, because we focus on freedom of the press, freedom of information, but also misinformation, to see some of the developments on social media platforms in the last couple of days. I think you all know what I'm alluding to. When a large social media giant starts to challenge the leader of a country, we have something quite important happening. It shows that some leaders are using misinformation, not just individuals or groups and companies, and it needs to be quite aggressively combated. And let's see how this turns out. But it's a very interesting, very new debate. You've seen one media giant do it, another one said, no, I don't want to get involved. Again, I don't want to give names here, but I think you all know what I'm talking about. So to go back to my initial point, misinformation has turned out to be a pandemic that we must together fight aggressively. These are new phenomena. We need to find new solutions. Otherwise, those that are at the last mile will be more vulnerable because they have already less access to information. So if they are the recipient of one wrong information, I think it's very easy to know and understand the damage that can be done.
Absolutely, Eric. And the important point is that it's all evolving. I think technology is evolving. The way we use technology is evolving. I think it's so adaptable. So as we go along things, but under all circumstances, the good outweighs the bad. And I think the fact that we're amplifying the positive ways to use it while circumventing and securing ourselves from the pitfalls, I think it's interesting. And you're right, over the next few days, we will see how social media, often which are considered as another country in itself, are going to evolve with their rules and regulations. A last question, and then we can sort of end is start packing up is how, Eric, I think maybe this is something for you. How do we see government schools gaining through last mile connectivity? We have programs where we're strategically connecting gram panchayats. We have programs where we have strategically connected universities. But in terms of government schools, have we built in, or are there plans to build in that last mile connectivity?
It's happening, and I think that the government is very aware of the need to cover this last mile in government schools as well. And UNESCO has worked very closely with MHRD, the Ministry of Human Resource Development, to try to provide solutions in a variety of ways. We're there to advise, and we will continue to do so in the next few months and years. This has definitely come to light in the last couple of months, and I'm sure that it will be one of the situations that will change too. In other words, we must provide connectivity to these schools all the way into the most rural and isolated areas. And I'm willing to bet that a lot of effort will go into that in the next couple of years.
I'll just add here, Nupur, on this last mile connectivity for better access to education in government schools, where we have partnered with the government of Rajasthan and Maharashtra, providing direct online classes, studio-based module to over 200 schools in Bombay alone, and also in Jaipur and other parts of Rajasthan. So I think that's already happening through technology. Also, we have developed teachers training module, enabling the government school teachers go more prepared while taking sessions, in the government schools. So I think technology is a big enabler on all the fronts on the SDGs and development indicators.
Yeah, and I think we're also seeing a shift in the e-education models. Earlier, there were there was a notion that we need to pre-record classes, create high bandwidth content, very detailed, when now we're seeing the emergence of live virtual classrooms where teachers are actually teaching using like they would in an online on a virtual real space virtually, using software like this, which is a lot easier for the teachers to access. Having said that, thank you, and I'd like to call upon all of you all to give your closing remarks. Can we start with you, Akanksha?
Well, I think it was a pleasure to be at this forum with such eminent speakers, and thoroughly enjoyed, this session. I look forward to see much more technology interface, particularly in the last mile for development indicators and SDGs.
Thank you, Akanksha. Mr. Rastogi?
I would like to thank all participants and all speakers for this enlightening discussion. Definitely, it has created an environment for thinking and analyzing what is possible through technology during the COVID-19 time. And we have never thought about technology in such a way if this COVID-19 lockdown or other things would not have come. Thank you for all.
Right, Eric?
Thank you. Well, in difficult times, I think everybody has a natural tendency to see the glass half empty. So I think we have to conclude on a hopeful message, because quite clearly everybody, and I mean everybody all over the world, is saying that many things have to change, and many things are starting to change, and they're starting to change very rapidly. So we just have to ensure that we will be together, governments, civil society, businesses, and others, to make sure that it goes in the right direction. And when it comes to the topic of today, focusing on the last mile connectivity in times of COVID-19, I hope that we have brought some hope to all of those who watched and listened today, because definitely there are changes on the way. Definitely there have been many positive changes already, and if we work together, there's no doubt that in 2 years the situation will be even better if, God forbid, another danger rears its head.
Great, thank you. Shreya, can I hand it over to you now for final remarks?
Thank you so much, Nupur. I'll begin by thanking Sterlite Technologies, who are our partner for hosting this webinar, and who share our vision for working together to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals in India. We've partnered for various such impactful programs before and hope to continue and grow this partnership. Thank you so much, Sterlite Technologies. A special mention to you, Akanksha. It was with your determined efforts and vision that we were able to design and conduct today's session. You're definitely a visionary. It's been a pleasure always partnering with you and Sterlite. We would like to thank all our distinguished panelists for taking time out today and sharing their extremely valuable views and suggestions with us, which covered a huge spectrum of technology, communication, and connecting the last mile. Thank you so much, Mr. Eric Holt, Mr. Atul Rastogi, Mr. Akanksha Sharma. Thank you, Nupur, for conducting such a thought-provoking and informative session on a subject which is not only relevant today in times of COVID-19, but also post this pandemic, to strengthen our reach to the last mile and strengthen the economy. We've had a huge audience today hearing our extremely eminent speakers. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending the webinar in such large numbers and participating by asking extremely relevant questions. Last but not the least, we thank our entire team at GCNI and SustainEverse, led by Mr. Kamal Singh, who have tirelessly worked to make this webinar a success. We hope to have more such interactions with everybody. Together, we can grow better and stronger. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.